first, I'd like to take a look at this Old English case that involved some men at sea whose ship sunk, and they found themselves adrift in a lifeboat. This was in the 1880s. So there were 4 men in the lifeboat, and 2 of the men, maybe 3, but 2 of them for sure, decided to kill one of the other men in order to improve their own chances for survival. They believed that certainly all 4 of them would die if they didn't kill one of their compatriots in the lifeboat, basically to eat him, to drink his blood in place of water that they didn't have, and to eat him for food, to cannibalize him, literally cannibalize him. So this is the case of the British court, versus Dudley and Stevens. It's termed R versus Dudley and Stevens because R, I believe, was the prosecutor in the case, and the case occurred in 1884. When was the actual sinking? I think I'll get to that. Let's see. Yeah, the same year. Interesting. All right, so I'll just go through the facts, and then we'll look at the decision. So it was a yacht, a privately owned yacht with a 4-man crew. The crew was the owner, Dudley, one of the defendants in the case. He was the captain of the ship, and he brought some friends with him. One of his friends was Stevens, another of the defendants. A third was Brooks. And the fourth was a cabin boy. The youngest, 17 years old, an inexperienced seaman. This was Richard Parker. Richard Parker would be the one killed on the lifeboat. So the yacht's sailing along. It was going around from Sydney to Sydney from Southampton. So a long voyage from Britain to Australia. And they're at sea and they're sailing away, and they were, let's see, a wave struck and washed away one of the sails. And the captain immediately realized the yacht was doomed. They were in a storm. They didn't have their sail. And he ordered the 4 men, the 4 passengers on the ship, including himself, into a lifeboat. The lifeboat was a flimsy construction, only 1/4-inch thick boards. And they put a hole in it as they lowered it to sea to try to get away. Their main vessel, the yacht, sank within 5 minutes, and the crew abandoned ship. They salvaged only some vital navigation instruments, 2 tins of turnips, and no fresh water, no water at all. And they are in the middle of nowhere. So they had to fight off a shark with oars. They were 700 miles away from the nearest land. They kept the tins of turnips uneaten until finally they just began to starve. Excuse me. They managed to catch a sea turtle. They ate that, presumably raw. They were going to drink its blood for hydration, but it had been contaminated with seawater, so that didn't work. They weren't able to catch any rainwater. And within a week of being at sea, they were beginning to drink their own urine. The men, obviously, at this point were in failing health. And they started discussing drawing lots, straws, to choose a victim that would die to feed the others. So they're debating this amongst themselves. They couldn't agree. And finally, the captain told the others it was better that one of them dies so that the others survive, and that they would choose straws. Now, one of the other 3 survivors, Brooks, not a defendant in this case, refused to do this. He wasn't drawing straws to see who would live. They discussed it some more. And then the next day, the captain, Dudley, and Stevens, the 2 men who would be defendants at trial after this, signaled to each other that it would be the cabin boy, Parker, who would be killed. And that way they would be able to drink his blood for hydration and have him for food, for sustenance. And they did. Dudley said a prayer, and with Stevens, the other defendant, standing by to hold the cabin boy's legs if he struggled, the captain put a knife into the cabin boy's neck, cutting his jugular vein, killing him. Well, of course, eventually the other 3 men were rescued, did survive, and they were charged. Dudley and Stevens, at least, were charged with murder for the killing of the cabin boy Parker. So with those basic facts out of the way, let's look now to the actual case. Before I do that, I'm going to take a look at the law of self-defense members live stream at the chat, because we do answer questions. I see someone's asking, outside the scope of law of self-defense. Not really. It's a justification defense. You would use the doctrine of necessity in a variety of ways in a self-defense type of scenario.